on the M25 again, heading to New Malden to go meet a Reverend Stephen Kuhrt. He's a vicar and has been, I think maybe even in this church, Christ Church New Malden, for 20 years. One of the things which I'm making these videos about is the thing which just absolutely confuses me is how, yeah, sure, there are people that are abusive, and you get characters who are nasty, narcissist, abusive, all the things that, you know, humanity manages to create. And that's not actually a surprise. The thing that surprises me is how the church covers it up, how the church sides with the abuser, with the narcissist, excludes the victim and keeps them silent. I just don't get it. I don't understand the culture. I don't understand why on earth it's so prevalent. So what I've been trying to explore, and what everyone sort of puts me towards, is safeguarding. Hey Sam, you should look into safeguarding. And I've tried to speak to various people, and the kind of legality of it and the specialism of it isn't something that interests me. But now I'm realizing that what safeguarding is actually about is it's a shop window or a magnifying glass into a culture. That dusty culture I never found interesting, I still don't. The political side of the church, the power side, the money side. And the people that love to sit in those spaces are quite different to those who just sort of read the Bible and think, oh yeah, church is the body of Christ. So Stephen and the conversation I'm hoping I have after reading his book over the last couple of days is going to be very much about what the hell is the power in this thing. So I'm looking forward to meeting him. He's on GB News all the time, which you may well not agree with. I'm not sure I do. But he's a very eloquent chap. And ironically, my school friend from Romford goes to the church, and his wife is the head of safeguarding. Or maybe, no, I think Rob, my friend, is head of safeguarding at this church, Christ Church. So I'm looking forward to see what comes up. We were talking about how do we start this conversation. I think we start with the book. It makes sense. And you saying that it's self-published, I think gives us actually a huge amount of insight into why you wrote it and why it wasn't accepted.
Absolutely.
That's a good point, starting point.
Totally.
So I've read this over the last 3 days. Thank you for sending it to me. And let's talk about what inspired you to write this book specifically. You're a writer anyway, you're a historian, and you're a church leader or a reverend. I don't know how you'd speak about yourself. A vicar. I feel, as I was driving here, it was an odd, I was last living around here 20 years ago. So driving back here felt quite useful, actually. In our conversation, I would like to be, I don't know, maybe supported in what your views are. I'd like to feel maybe vaguely vindicated. And what I would love is for people that watch this to be healed to some extent. So that's my aim for this conversation.
It's all good.
In doing so, we don't need to pussyfoot around.
No.
We don't need to be religiously careful. And that's what I appreciate most about your book. You're not careful.
No.
But there is that thing of, well, how do we respect people? And the thing that the big, why I phoned you up straight away when my dad suggested you get in touch, was essentially what I've learned through the Pill of Archie stuff, through Soul Survivor, is the church hierarchy, safeguarding, and in its current form, the reports written, which, just bonkers amount of money. None of these things love the victim.
No.
They support the institution. And they hide the abuser.
Absolutely. What you've picked up on is fundamental. There's an indifference, sadly, and those survivors of abuse, they know that. They pick that up intuitively. They know they don't matter in the fundamental sense that they should. And this is why, again and again, they will say that they've been hurt more by the institution of the church than by the person who did the actual abuse. Again and again, that's said. Which is an astonishing statement when you think about it. But the hurt from an organisation that they have assumed will support and love and care for them, when they don't get that, it is utterly shattering.
So I think the best route to start into our conversation is where did the book come from?
Yeah.
Tell me your story.
Well, it came out of my experience.
And yours, I mean, rather than repeat all, I'm sure a lot of people are going to buy the book, so they'll understand your story from it. But just in a nutshell, you grew up in a Church of England family. Your dad was an archdeacon.
Absolutely.
This stuff is you were probably familiar crawling around in this kind of environment.
Entirely. Grew up as a vicar's son, always been in the Church of England, received loads and loads of utterly rich experience. My experience personally has been very, very good, but basically my life changes when, as a soon-to-be vicar, I was curate here, sort of assistant minister as it were, and just about to become vicar, where I suddenly become aware of a big safeguarding issue. I insist it's dealt with, and to my utter surprise, get a colossal amount of pressure to bury this from the wider institution, from my diocese. I know that's wrong, and so I persist. It results in a criminal conviction for the perpetrator.
Well, if we can talk about the detail a little. You don't talk about it in your book. I don't know if that means this is an exclusive, if you feel able to, whether it's naming names, obviously not the victims, but if you're able to talk about it, because I think, again, this truthfulness often... the example I was going to mention earlier was I filmed with a chap called Halim in Long Island on the east coast of the US. He had been put in prison for 18 years for attempted murder. I don't know whether he actually did murder him. I don't remember. In some respects, that wasn't what I was there for, to film with him. I was filming about his rehabilitation. I never asked him on camera or off of it what he did. I never asked him any of those things of what he did when he got it wrong as a teenager. What I asked him was who he was then. And since then, I spent 2 days with him filming, and he calls me a brother. He really values me. So it's interesting when we talk about this to say, do we need to talk about the detail? In some respects, we could look him up because his name was there and people that were interested could find out. When we talk about safeguarding, it's so general. I don't know if people feel as if they can get a hold of it. So as I'm asking you, I'm kind of giving you an out with Helen, or if you think it would be useful for people who have experienced similar things.
I think a level of detail is important. Obviously, it's about really protecting those involved. But we have a lay reader at this church called Bryn Hughes, who was an authorised lay minister, who also did a lot of youth work. And I become aware that there are loads and loads of rumours about his potential misconduct with, teenage girls in the church. And there are, such is the scale of those rumours, that I go to the Archdeacon, Stephen Roberts, his name was, Archdeacon of Wandsworth, and I could not believe how hostile he was to me over it. Nothing prepared me for that. Really angry. I couldn't quite understand it. Because
and you were vicar in charge at the time?
Well, I was just about to become vicar here. And it was at the level of lots and lots of rumour, but I think if there's enough of that, you have to take it seriously. And the response I got was so hostile that I thought, well, we do believe in innocent till proven guilty, so I came back to the church. And then when some evidence did start to emerge, some concrete evidence, I felt, well, if I go back to him with a very small amount, I've seen what will happen. So I made sure, and this later came back to bite me because this was part of what I got suspended for, I made a few discreet inquiries and said, would people be prepared to go on the record? And I was given some contact details, and that's all I did, very, very simply said, I gather something may have happened. I was very cautious about the language. Would you be prepared, do you want to take this further? And some of them did, some of them didn't, and the result eventually was a criminal trial and a conviction on just one count, and with historic stuff It's very difficult to, but I am still meeting people affected, loads and loads of people. And it's the most important thing I've ever done in my entire life, is both dealing with it and refusing to pipe down when there was enormous pressure to, and refusing to pipe down about the story. And the book basically is the result of that, because what I was forced to realise was that I thought, well, why was this handled so badly? Or why was there a refusal to handle it? And why did every subsequent safeguarding matter that I was involved in show similar characteristics? So an institution and a local church, because local churches are really just as problematic, where you can get Christian cultures where people associate the church as their safe place, and ironically it becomes unsafe because of that reason. So anything unpleasant, anything difficult, people want to be kept at arm's length for as long as possible. And what I realised was that this has its seeds in a basic problem within church culture, not just within evangelical churches that I belong to, other churches have got it as well, where anything difficult you try and avoid for as long as possible. You hope it will go away. If you have to deal with it, you do the minimum possible to try and make sure that it's neutralised rather than dealt with. Because you've got to keep the show on the road, you've got to keep people feeling church is their nice place. And it's directly linked to churches becoming insipid, irrelevant places that actually are just serving up a load of meaningless cliches. So dealing with safeguarding is important in its own right, nothing's more important, but it's actually the key to the church becoming real. Because there's such a culture of untruth, such a culture of nonsense, such a culture of cover-up, and such a culture of indifference to the pain in people's lives, that I don't blame anyone for not taking the church seriously. So a lot of my passion about this is because this is the way, well, it's right to do. First and foremost, it's right to do for those who've suffered this horrendous treatment, but it's also the salvation of the church, or the rescue of the church, to put it in slightly less Christian jargon.
Yesterday I received a call from someone who wanted to let me know of something that was happening. She's a retired teacher, and she said when she was teaching in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't called safeguarding, it was called child protection.
Yeah.
I mean, how much more obvious could you be?
Yeah.
So if there were, and as a previous youth worker, if there are issues, and I was aware of them in some of the placements I was of that sort of, physical touching or whatever, some of those things happened I was aware of and it had to be dealt with. My job was to protect the children, basic child protection. Now, as a vicar, maybe you see yourself as a shepherd for the sheep, or and I've got sheep.
Particularly the vulnerable ones, particularly the ones
that get caught in the fences, the barbed wire, or they get fly strike. You need to keep an eye on them,
Absolutely.
make sure the flies aren't going to start gathering
100%.
around them. That's your job.
Absolutely.
Now, I read this and I don't think, oh gosh, you really put your neck out there, because it was what you were what was necessary to do. To protect the children. I mean, I'm not trying to be... but
you're
speaking about
right. It shouldn't have been unusual.
No. But why on earth?
Yeah.
So the story that I know from reading this, not only were you getting a CDM, which I'd like to understand, I'd also like to understand the role of the bishop and what he, I'm guessing he, tried to force upon you. For me, I just want to square away, just initially, right at the beginning of our conversation, what safeguarding is simply protecting individuals, vulnerable individuals, whether they're children,
or vulnerable adults. Absolutely.
Or vulnerable adults.
and it's also about it's not just responding once a problem happens. It's creating a culture where those things are not going to easily happen, and so much of safeguarding is preventative. It's about making sure that. So a good example would be behaviour. In a lot of churches, long-standing members of churches can behave as they want. They rampage around, and they may not be the same people who commit abuse, sometimes they are, but they help create an unsafe culture. Because if people come into a church and they recognise that it's a soft touch on adult misbehaviour, all of the worst behaviour I've ever encountered in church life has been by adults it's all been by established members of churches, not peripheral members. It's by people who think they can throw their weight around. And as I say, they're not the same people necessarily who commit abuse. Sometimes they might be, but they help to create an environment where it's a church that becomes a soft touch, because it becomes about neutralising poor behaviour and making the best of it rather than challenging it. And if you have a culture that challenges poor behaviour in church, you make it safer because you establish an accountable structure, an accountable culture, rather. And that's very unpopular. A lot of people don't like that. In fact, they think it's unchristian. So if someone behaves badly, it's rarely called unchristian. If someone responds to bad behaviour, people often will see that as unchristian, because they'll think bearing with people, essentially allowing them to get away with it. But the reason it's so serious is because it helps create unsafe environments.
So are you and I just odd that we don't relate to this culture? Because I feel like when we had that first phone call, I felt quite a lot of synergy between us. We kind of agreed. Talking like this, child protection, safeguarding, vulnerable people, duh.
Well, we're both sick of, the way I see it, Sam, is that we're both utterly sick with stuff that's been done within churches that's damaged people, and we're both furious about that. And we believe there's no excuse for it. And I think you do need a level of bravery, and some people find that because they've been so hurt by church that they sort of become disengaged with it and so don't mind critiquing it. I think probably I'm quite unusual in that I'm still embedded within the church and happy to completely speak out about how absolutely appalling the Church of England can be, and is over safeguarding. I believe the Church of England is rubbish at safeguarding, but I am committed to staying within it to make sure that improves.
And so we'll go into culture, we'll go into the various things that you cover and that we've spoken about before later, but I'm keen to understand your story more so. So there was this abusive chap that was taking advantage of young people and his role. In an environment that parents and the children thought, or young people thought was safe. So he made it unsafe. You spoke about that and enabled the young people to speak out. That for me is a really clear, a clear role. What can you then talk me through what went so wrong? So you then reported it. You didn't think. I mean, did you not think to speak to the police? Why was that not a?
Well, in the first place, back in those days, the church could deal with stuff internally without necessarily having to report it to the police. It's changed now. And initially, those involved wanted it dealt with by the church, and didn't want it dealt with by the police. That later changed, partly out of frustration with how badly the church, the wider diocese, was handling it. These days, this is back in 2006, 2007.
When I was a youth administrator.
A lot of stuff has directly got to involve the police now, which is a good thing. But basically, where it goes so badly wrong, for me personally, is that the absolute fury that I had forced the diocese to deal with something they didn't want to was just about what they could cope with. And when it results in a conviction, they can hardly sort of complain. But what they got furious about was me refusing to pipe down about how badly this had been handled, because every other subsequent case I was involved in was just as bad. You see, if things had improved, I'd have thought, well, that was 2006, 2007, but every single subsequent incident I was involved in was the same characteristics of trying to do the least possible for as long as possible. And I eventually realised that with all the growing emphasis on policies and procedures, that was all a complete smokescreen. Peter Drucker, the American management consultant, famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and culture eats policies and procedures for breakfast. And I realised that all of this emphasis on, form filling and whatever, it's important, but it's about 2% of effective safeguarding, if that, because if the culture doesn't change, then there's no sort of will to, deal with these things. And you've got to be like a dog with a bone over safeguarding. And I think quite a lot of people within the church sort of do their bit and they pass it on and then nothing happens. This happened with Justin Welby. And they say their prayers and say, well, God, you're in charge and you're sorted out, and it's important that we don't try and be in control too much. And it just slips away.
Yeah.
Whereas what you've got to do is follow it up and say, I haven't heard back from about this. And you've got to make quite a nuisance of yourself, to put it mildly.
It takes work.
Yeah, it takes work. You've got to be brave. You've got to not mind being a real pain. Anyone who's brought about change in society, when Wilberforce, he made himself an absolute pain over slavery. And that's what we need, people who really don't mind. You've got to have quite a thick skin. Because within the Church of England, particularly with my pedigree, my background, a lot of people would think, well, you should have known what side your bread was buttered. It's almost like being a Freemason, really, betraying the Masons when you, you're treated like you should, how dare you, you're a traitor. One of the things in the penultimate chapter, I talk about the fact that prophets, people who speak out, are always seen as traitors because you're normally speaking out against, the organisation or the people you belong to. And that's really important to be so convinced of the importance of what you're doing that you don't mind receiving a good kicking for doing it. And I've received a really big kicking.
So tell me about the kicking, because, and especially, it would be good to understand what did you go through? So what I didn't sense was what pressure did it put on you as a man,
Well, it was tough, but
what happened? Give me.
Well, basically, what happened was that eventually my diocese gets so fed up with the waves that I'm making that they
about this one individual.
Yeah, about safeguarding generally by that stage.
Yeah.
And saying Southwark safeguarding is rubbish is quite provocative to a diocese that are trying to make out that. So the policy is called a safe church, and I said that's a dreadful name for a policy because that leaves ambiguous about whether it's protecting the church as an institution or people. That goes to the heart of rubbish safeguarding. Well, when they spent loads of money on logos and printing it and making it look nice, that's not the thing they necessarily want to hear.
Yeah.
But basically what happens is that the Bishop of Kingston, one of the area bishops, institutes a review of my ministry. On the surface, it's to deal with the issues that I'm concerned about and to, but in practice, it's just a stitch up. And I produce loads of material for this review because I say to my team, we've got nothing to hide. And it's all then weaponised against me. So I produce a 26 paper on safeguarding where I go through all of the cases I've come across in full detail with my take on them being handled badly again and again, submit it to this reviewer who's supposedly meant to be looking at, this issue. Total silence for 4.5 months. So I take it to the national safeguarding team of the Church of England, who are equally hopeless. Really difficult to get them to acknowledge they've received it. After a month, they say, well, you've just got to take this up with your diocese. So then I make the mistake, it turns out, of sharing it with other people who are lobbying for safeguarding change in the Church of England, people who couldn't care more, totally safe as houses. But I made the big mistake because I was so frustrated, my mind scrambled, but also because I knew these people were totally safe. I didn't redact the names that were in the paper when I shared it with these small group of advisors. That is then weaponised against me because I'm done for breaching confidentiality. And that was a bad mistake, which I freely admit. But also they go back to how I handled the case all those years before, in 2007, and the fact that I made contact with a few people and simply asked, do you want to take this further? I was abusing process, allegedly. And so those 2 counts are against me. And I think they deliberately make sure one of them's out of time, the person who makes the complaint, working, I believe, with the Bishop of Southwark. The person who makes the complaint, I think, deliberately makes an out-of-time complaint because then it's denied because of being out of time. But then they have a month to appeal against that take every single day. I have a month to counter appeal, I take 2 days. Then they have another month to counter appeal, take every single day of it. So the aim was to make sure I was suspended for as long as possible, I think to wear me down, to make me depressed, to make me resign. Very often people do resign in those circumstances.
How depressed were you?
I was fine from that point of view, because I've got a bit of a thicker skin perhaps than some. I knew what I was doing was the most important thing I'd ever done, and that's a huge motivation. Fortunately, you know, the people I really admire going to bat on safeguarding the Church of England are people who've been abused. They're the ones with the real courage, because they're coping with all of that as well. I, through the grace of God, haven't coped with that, which enables me to say, no, this is really vital that I go. But also I got wonderful support. So great support from this church.
Yeah, and I remember you saying that. The difference, I guess, is, and where I've spoken to other vicars, your stipend and home is dependent on your work. Yep. Your calling, your role here. That starts coming. Isn't that a stress with a family and? Isn't that?
I can see why. I can see why it should be, but this is where Christian theology comes into it. I really believe that we are called as Christian ministers to put, the gospel first, which includes God's truth of responding to stuff that's wrong and calling it out. And I thought, no, I must do this whatever the consequences. Makes me sound very sort of, but no one was going to burn me at the stake, no one was going to stone me to death. The worst that could happen would be that I would be sort of turfed out of my house and have no money, and but I believe we've got to be prepared to do that if this stuff's right, because actually most people look back. The reason why most clergy are depressed, I know more clergy that are depressed than not, and I think it's because they know deep down they're going to bat for the wrong side. Often their hearts...
Or they're being utterly squashed. So I spoke with a lovely guy, he's in Luton, Luke Larner, he's a vicar or a father. I get confused as to who wants to be referred to.
Well, if they're Anglican Catholics, often they like to be called father.
I think he might
or
be
Roman
Reverend.
Catholics.
Well, I don't remember. But he spoke about that at the end of our film, about the number of people he knows that are in clergy that are on pills for depression.
Well,
and he's been he has experienced quite.
And I don't blame them, because they may not have the support or the agency or the background I've got, but all the key people encourage me.
And you were a teacher before as well, right?
Yeah,
so
school
you've had
teacher.
a career.
Well, 7 years I spent teaching in my old school in Croydon, but that showed me the utter vital role of nurturing young people. And the other crucial thing was, I think perhaps sometimes people are coping with stuff and they don't quite know how to reach out for the support. So my old school friend, his name's Simon Blackwell, and an old school friend of mine, and he phoned me up every week that I was suspended to check how I was. Absolutely worth his weight in gold. Absolutely amazing. And a lot of my friends who might have had a bit of sort of experience of church when they're younger, but not overwhelmingly now, but they all said, keep going, what you're doing is really important. I mean, I had one friend, Penny, who'd say to me, I was going to get a lot worse for you, but you're doing the right thing. And I thought, oh, thanks for the encouragement. But that was great, because I was surrounded by friends
and the church.
Saying, and people at this church, those in the know, were fantastic. And
how did it get worse? So,
where it got worse is that, you see, in the end, I had to. The processes are quite tricky, because they can just carry on suspending. You have to, sort of agree. And I pleaded guilty to the sharing the names. That was a mistake. I think it was utterly disproportionate the way they went after me and all that. But basically, in the end, I get an agreed penalty, and I'm allowed to. I get an email saying I can come back to work after 5.5 months of suspension. It's absolutely ridiculous. If it was really as serious as they made out. They should have had an interview with me.
Yeah.
There was no interview before I was suspended, completely in contravention of, because they didn't want to hear my case. They didn't. If I'd explained it, they know they'd have had to respond to it differently. So they had to respond to it all in the abstract. This guy has breached process. This guy has, shared these names that he shouldn't have. They didn't want to hear the story because then they would have had to interpret it differently. And that happened all the way through. So I come back from suspension, and they then expect me to resign so then a 2-year process starts of attempt at constructive dismissal. It was even worse, because at least when you're in a process, there's a certain formality. So I come back from suspension, and one of the things they try and do is do a safeguarding audit of the church to try and find anyone I've upset down the years and try and make that into a safeguarding case against me.
Right.
So safeguarding then starts to be weaponised against me. And this often happens when people make issues about safeguarding. Often the way they respond is to weaponise safeguarding against them. Well, and try and twist it into a safeguarding issue. Because of course, if you've challenged them, you've challenged other people as well. Mm-hmm. And I have had to challenge a lot of very poor behaviour within this church to make it into what it should be. And of course, people don't like being challenged. And if you challenge someone on their behaviour, they feel they're being bullied. It doesn't matter whether their behaviour has been atrocious. And the diocese was only too ready to encourage anyone who had any sort of grievance. And I said to the area bishop, and it was Richard Cheetham, who's now retired, I said to him in one meeting, does the truth or otherwise of the allegations against me actually matter? And he couldn't handle that question. He said, of course it matters, but, And then when it was repeated by the church warden later on in the meeting, he completely lost his rag, which was very rare for him, because they just wanted me to pipe down, and me saying, no, we've got to deal with stuff that's true, we've got to deal with evidence. And a new bishop comes to Kingston, Martin Gainsborough, and actually offers me a year's money and housing to leave the job. And the church gets behind me and completely opposes that. We've got a brilliant archdeacon called Bridget Shepherd who's just started, and she's determined to turn over a completely new leaf on all this. And Martin Gainsborough, the Bishop of Kingston, to be fair to him, has totally changed his tune. I think he's realised he got it wrong. So I want to give credit where it's due.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to restart this camera. It's the challenge of doing it on my own.
Right.
Good.
No, I want to be... So the cost has been considerable, but it's the most important thing I've ever done. And as I say, the people who are the real heroes are the people who've dealt with absolutely dreadful stuff that's happened to them, and they're committed to bringing about change.
I agree. I absolutely agree with you. However, the system that you've explained, I've heard a few times before, and I won't mention the stories now. But people who have tried to do the right thing, or they've had a disagreement with whether they're a curate with their vicar, or the vicar with the dean, or whatever. There's been these disagreements, and the process that you were exposed and forced into isn't new. And I think people watching this will think, yeah. So what I'd like to ask now is why and how. So I have this really simplistic understanding that the church is the body of Christ. And you mentioned that in the book. You talk about if something suffers, the whole body suffers.
Yep. And we particularly look after the vulnerable parts of that body.
Why on earth does the Church of England, are we so different? Is the church here so different to the cathedral? Is your role as a vicar so different to the role of a bishop or an archbishop? I
think.
Let's try. I want to understand this culture.
No, I think at whatever level of the church you're in, you face a similar temptation to safeguard yourself and your sort of. The Church of England can be an incredibly cushy number if you want it to be. It's an institution that takes care of its own. If you keep your head down, you don't cause trouble. People who become bishops are overwhelmingly people who've never upset anyone. Okay, that's the chief qualification of a bishop, is you've got to be just over the level of incompetence. You've got to be urbane, and you've got to be nice. I say they're the sort of people you could take home to meet your grandmother. And you've got to, crucially, have never really upset anyone. You mustn't have upset the apple cart. There's a few of them, you can look as though you do by being outspoken on safe issues that everyone's agreed on. You can have a go at people about the environment, you can make statements about racism, all things which are vitally important, but are fairly safe areas. No one's going to be angry and annoyed at you. They'll just say, so you can do a bit of that, but you can't ever have destabilised the institution. One or two of them get through. The Bishop of Newcastle's got through. She slipped through the net. And there'll be one or two others, but basically you've got to be urbane. You've got to be nice. And it's similar with vicars. Local vicars are expected to be nice. It's why TV vicars, which I talk about in the book, why so often they are drippy, wet characters, because most people want that in their vicar, because they want someone who's not going to basically challenge stuff, who's going to go along with established power. And of course that's disastrous for safeguarding.
I would challenge that a little bit, in that I think there's been, you talk about the development from sort of Blackadder or Mr. Bean as a vicar, or moving on to Rev. I'd say there's a new kind of vicar, which is the soul survivor-esque, HTB, whitened teeth, wife with 4 children, as in the wife with a dress. And there is this visual optic first. I look good on Instagram thing.
Within the church, that's absolutely right. Very interesting, there was an episode of Rev, I think it was the first episode, where a sort of HDB type vicar does come along, and they're regarded with great suspicion by the outside world. Inside, you've got this cult of Christian celebrity, where I totally agree, where people who are the opposite of the drippy vicar, the charismatic, powerful figure, handsome guy in chinos, or whatever it might be, where they get this utterly unhealthy sort of worship, with no one really critiquing it. And they'll sell VIP tickets for, where you get to meet your, and the cult of Christian celebrity, which again I talk about in the book, is part of this poisonous cocktail. So there are particular factors in the sort of local church, particularly the parish church, which give rise to problems, and then within the particularly dynamic, energetic parts of Christianity, you see another whole set of problems. But what's similar in both is people not wanting to rock the boat, people not wanting to challenge, and the terrible abuse that's been committed. Every tradition has their one. Peter Ball in the Anglican Catholics, Jonathan Fletcher and John Smythe with the Conservative Evangelicals, Mike Pilavacci with the Charismatics, David Tudor with the Liberal Catholics. But in each case, these people had a certain charisma, a certain level of oomph, and that meant other people were afraid of upsetting the apple cart,
and they did a huge amount of harm because of it.
Yeah, they did harm, but they were made worse by a culture that actually, frankly, let them down. So they're all utterly culpable, but all of them became corrupted, I would hasten to add. So if they'd had proper accountability this is the great tragedy, because in all of the cases, actually, even Smythe, I imagine, without knowing a huge amount about it, I imagine he did not start off the way that he quickly became.
No.
But if you're within a culture which frankly doesn't care about the vulnerable. You see, I believe there's a passage in the Gospels about Jesus saying, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. I believe that, to me, that's absolutely fundamental, that if we don't have care of the vulnerable absolutely at the top of the tree, nothing else we do in church actually matters. It's all a complete load of rubbish. And paradoxically, or likewise, when we place absolute priority in that, everything else starts becoming authentic, because people know if you're prioritising the vulnerable and their care, and people can see that's absolutely front and centre, then everything else becomes healthy as a result. They were enormously let down, those people, by a culture that was frankly indifferent to the vulnerable.
I spoke with maybe 60 plus people who phoned me specifically around their experience at Soul Survivor.
Yeah.
Probably 10% of those, maybe 20% of those experienced similar and greater, or much greater, abuse probably at the hand of Mike Levachi. When I was talking, I've got a few friends that I meet with. One chap is Brother Christopher, he's a monk in his 80s, just down the road from me. Another chap is Rabbi Alex Goldberg, and he's a good friend in Guildford. When I was chatting with Alex and with Christopher, just about how do I deal with this? I don't have a church community as such, but they represent my community. I sort of said, how do I deal with this? And what's the story here? Alex really just categorically said, the thing that angers him most and the thing that I should look at most is, why does the institution not justly deal with those situations? Why are the victims silenced? And
because they don't matter. You know, sadly, they don't matter to the institution. The institution's indifferent to them because the continuation of the institution is not dependent in any way upon their treatment. Whereas the continuation of the institution is dependent, and people having a quiet life within it is dependent on keeping the show on the road. So, you know, the key thing is people do ask, why are abusers always treated better than victims of abuse or whistleblowers? And the answer is quite simple. That's because abusers are always invested in the status quo. They need the status quo to do what they do, their abuse. So those similarly, but for different reasons, invested in the status quo, they are natural allies of them. Whereas victims or survivors crying out for justice and whistleblowers are inherently disruptive to the status quo. They are always the bigger problem. They've got to be silenced and stamped out. Whereas in actual fact, until the abuse is revealed, the abusers actually are pillars of the status quo. That's why they're always, they're made Ariadine, or that's why they are sort of a canon of the cathedral and that sort of thing, because their agenda is to work their way into the institution, and others are very happy to collude with it. So Stephen Cottrell, perfectly happy for David Tudor. He knows all what David Tudor's got up to, perfectly happy for him to be reappointed as Ariadine, perfectly happy for him to become a canon of the cathedral. Stephen Cottrell is an absolute disgrace because he's tried to make out there's nothing he could do. Yeah. And in both those cases, and I talk about this in the book, the reason why he goes along with it is because Stephen Cottrell is utterly invested in the maintenance of the status quo, and he doesn't think for a minute about the consequences of what he's doing and just how much he's letting down those people who were abused by Tudor. And he hides behind the fact that the case has already been dealt with and all that sort of thing, and acts as though it doesn't really matter reappointing him as an area dean and a canon of the cathedral. And those things are really high status things. Those are the things that abusers crave because they're the marks of recognition. They're the marks that I'm safe. And
what's his ration? So just to try and get into his head, what you do really
Cottrell,
well. Yeah, and the new Archbishop of Canterbury. I mean,
well, what it is, it's a sort of form of insanity that takes over them, where they become so institutionalised. You see, when you're a vicar of a church, you're under a lot of temptation, but when you do funerals and you mix with ordinary people, that keeps you grounded. If you just mix with other weird churchy people wearing silly clothing, you enter into this mad world where it normalises things that should, so what will happen again and again is people in the outside world will be incredulous. They'll think, well, what was he thinking? And the fact is he wasn't thinking, or he wasn't thinking in anything like a normal way.
Is it a selfish ambition, or is it, because I literally, so I'm someone, I have my own business. Yeah. I was a youth minister. I've worked in a business for 3 years and it destroyed me. What's the rationale behind this? So another example would be and I mentioned this in the last video, and for the first time actually. I've recently found out that the vicar that married my wife and I had multiple affairs in the Southwark diocese. He left for a short time and now has been placed in another church a year later. These multiple affairs were a complete disregard of his position of power. I mean, he was married at the time, and it wasn't just one, it was a number. And I know of one of them who felt utterly destroyed because of it. For some reason, he was taken out, put back, and now he's back into place.
Yeah.
What is the motivation of people with authority? So exactly the same example would be, you would say to your lay reader, well, you can't work with young people anymore, but I'll recommend the church down the road. It's the same. But what's the rationale? You talk about truth, you talk about... Because
I think it's
feel like
nervousness about taking anything to its nth degree. If you take principles to their full place, it's very nerve-wracking for bishops. What they want to do, particularly within the Church of England, is not for anything to be extreme. They don't want to... They just want to sort of keep the show on the road by no one getting really worked up about anything. And that's why I relate it to a church being rubbish at ministry of mission.
Because you can see I'm angry.
Yeah, and rightly. And what I want to say is there is such a thing, very definitely, as righteous anger. We are meant to be angry, particularly when people are abused by the church or when power is abused, and we should. And what we've got is a rather lazy, complacent bunch of people running the church because they know. See, it's not even that they're trying to protect the institution rather than people. It's worse than that. They're trying to protect their vested interest in the institution, their cushy, their cushy number. Yeah. Basically, if you have got a job which is demanding and hard. One of the options, if you're a Christian, is to get ordained in the Church of England. Because what you then get is you get a nice place to live, you get a decent enough salary, you get status in the local community, and crucially, you get a job that is entirely unaccountable in terms of performance. Now that's worth about 80 grand a year, isn't it? If you can do a job where no one ever tells you how bad you're doing a job, financially, that's worth a huge amount. And there's just that's why I call them the Captain Darlings in the Church of England.
So take it even earlier. So it's the sort of Jane Austen, like the culture is more Jane Austen.
Oh, yeah.
You either become, what is it, the soldier?
Yeah.
I don't remember what the order is of the sons.
That's right. Yeah, the useless one goes into the church. And they pretty much still do. The Church of England is full, and I can't really comment on other denominations. That's for other people to do. But the Church of England is full of absolute lame ducks.
But they're not lame because they disciplined you. They gave you a CDM.
They can be very vicious.
So but they're not lame. That's what I find.
Well, the ones when people are threatened, they can be remarkably effective at. They can be remarkably effective at what they want to do. That's why I talk about willful incompetence. Yeah. People often say, "Is it cock up or conspiracy?" And it's a very unhelpful dichotomy. Because basically the Church of England is naturally incompetent, but they've got no motive to improve because they found that works. So if someone comes forward and you don't get, with an abuse, and you don't get back to them for months, that's natural incompetence. But what they found is the person gets exhausted and gives up.
Let's talk about that quickly.
So it's willful incompetence.
And you're quoting one of Peter Ball's victims, right, with that willful incompetence. I think that's what...
Oh, did they? Right.
Yeah, so their experience through the safeguarding process was willful incompetence.
Well, they often, to be honest, I used the phrase was my own, but I think it captures how a lot of people feel that what happens, again and again, I've heard this story, is people pluck up the courage to come forward.
Yeah, which takes a
huge amount. They're seen by a bishop and archdeacon or whoever who says, I'm shocked. Can I promise you this will be dealt with? And they see him and they sort of are utterly genuine at that point. And then the person goes away and they don't hear anything and they think, well, no, he definitely was genuine. He really did care. And then the months go past and it dawns on them that nothing's going to be done. Now, what has gone on, I think, is that bishop or archdeacon, when they first heard about it, realise how serious it is. But then they reflect on it and they start to get nervous about what will then happen. And a bit like when you're revising for an exam at school and you do everything possible to stop work, you sharpen your pencils, then you tidy your desk, then you go downstairs for a cup of coffee, then you say, I'll start at 12. I think that sort of happens with them, where they just put it off and put it off and put it off. So eventually when it all comes out and they're asked, but this was flagged up with you, they say, well, yes, I do remember. something, and it's because they felt nervous about dealing with it. And the key thing is that they've weighed up the consequences of what they're going to do. And you asked earlier about why I've acted in the way I've done and what's kept me going. I've got this slightly unorthodox view, which a lot of people are quite nervous about, that I think we're just meant to do the right thing and leave the consequences to God. Because as soon as we weigh up what might happen through doing the right thing, I think we either don't do it at all or we shave crucial edges off it. And that's again and again. So when George Carey has sent 7 letters about Peter Ball and he sent the least serious one to the police, people have said, what was George doing? It's inexplicable. And my answer has been, no, he was trying to do the least possible. He knew he had to do something, but he was trying to do the minimum possible to make sure so he was trying to manage the outcome.
Yeah.
Now that is appalling, it's blasphemous really, because what we're doing is we're standing in place of God. What we've got to do is do the right thing and trust that God will sort out the outcome. And what I find is, although there's a lot of God talking now, I find non-Christians, people outside the church, get unbelievably interested when I say that, because they believe, wow, that's really important,
There's a thing of justice here.
Yeah.
So there are 2 things which I was observing when reading and just through these last couple of years. The first is safeguarding feels more like, timely at the moment, when you hit a pothole and you damage your wheel or tyre, and you get in touch with the council. I don't know if you've had to do this. It's a real pain in the bum. You have to take a picture of where it is. They have to. Now, what they have to have done, the council would have had to have known about that in order to then give you a refund, the damage done. In order to do that, you're sending multiple letters. You're having to send emails. You have to be consistent. You don't hear anything. They won't pay out unless you're. Now, that's a pain in the arse when it's a tyre. It's deathly when it's your own. You've experienced abuse.
Yeah, it's awful.
So there's this one side that is a process-led. There's also this side which is a culture-led. And neither serve the people that have been abused. So how, if someone's watching this, they might even be in a situation, or they know they have a responsibility because they think the person that abused them is continuing to do so.
Yeah.
How do they go about it now, if they're in the Church of England?
Well, I mean, the Church of England at the moment is trying to up its game. Doesn't mean it's got there yet, but what I would urge is do all the right things, bring it to the attention of the people in charge. They will have to take it seriously.
But they don't. So I've even heard a response yesterday from someone. I mean, I can't talk about it because he's deciding whether he brings it up with me on camera. First time. He waited 6 months for a report to be written. And he's just said, I'm really disappointed and I'm crushed.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is, first of all, people must still take it to the official people. But then, if they don't get justice, there are advocates around. There's people like Andrew Greystone. I'm prepared to play this role as well. There are people who will say, I'm going to shoulder this burden with you. I am not going to let this go, because this is absolutely crucial. And that's where we've got to learn. Those of us who are passionate about this issue have got to create better networks for supporting people. And it's totally within our wit to be able to do this. We've got to set up networks with people who really know their stuff much better than I do about how to do that in such a way as we keep people utterly safe. But that's all to do. So we've got to make sure that people are not able to be isolated, that they feel, no, this is a group of people or this is that is absolutely rock solid behind me. Because actually, all of us in life, when we get through tough times, we get through it with the help of others, don't we? It's quite rare we do it as a rugged individual. The reason I've survived the attempt to constructively dismiss me is not primarily because I've got a thick skin and a fairly robust sort of personality. That's minor compared to the support I've got. And what we've got to make sure is these people feel totally accompanied along the way. And we're at the very earliest stages of sorting that out, but that's what we've got to do. And draw the fire. That can be quite a, when you say to people, no, we're going to, you've been terribly treated here, I'm going to make myself an absolute pain on your behalf.
It's interesting because you weren't the vicar in charge when you heard about the allegations.
No, it was an interregnum. The vicar was, the gap between vicars. All these rumours start flying around right towards the end of my curacy. I happen to be, usually you move on to another church.
Yeah.
I happen to be appointed vicar here. And I'd sort of got the job, but I was yet to be licensed at that stage when I started. And I think there probably was a feeling from the diocese, look, we've been part of appointing you to this job. You should be grateful to us. Why are you making waves? They can often feel, that's pretty ungrateful to be making our lives more difficult. Unofficially, the message still is, they will deny this, but unofficially the message is defuse it if you can. And if you don't, and if you can be seen to have made a problem bigger, which is often the way then eventually nothing's too bad for you. I mean, it was extraordinarily vicious. And you had weak, rather, sort of pathetic individuals in some ways who are capable of extraordinary viciousness once threatened. It's really interesting. In fact, the two go together, because if they haven't really got any real strong moral conviction, then the viciousness that they're prepared to do, it's a very interesting.
Comparing it to dogs, the little nervous dog that's leaning against the wall will be the one that bites you when you go to stroke, not the big confident dog that moves towards you. I mean,
well, we need more big confident dogs in the Church of England. No, I mean we do. We need people who have just got that inner confidence about truth. If we regard truth as a friend, to personify truth, if when truth comes and knocks on our door, we welcome him or her in, we sit them down, we say, oh, how are you doing? Whereas if we think, oh, flipping heck, truth arrived, oh dear, I'm not around today. And there is that. It's all about, for Christians, whether we believe that the truth will set you free, which Jesus said. And he wasn't just referring to it in a narrow sense there, I believe. He was referring to the truth about everything.
Yeah.
And truth is liberating. Truth, is like opening the windows in a stuffy room, They talk about it being the best disinfectant, don't they? None of this means that it's easy to actually implement this, but that is entirely, it's our mindset, and it's whether we're fearful or whether we're appropriately confident.
Kind of revolution that you're suggesting. So at the moment, it's like, I think you mentioned Stephen Lawrence for another reason in your book, but my friends, I grew up in East London.
Yep.
When we all started learning to drive, I was a bit later, but whenever all the black guys in the late 90s were pulled over by the police. The institutional stuff that we all know about meant they were all pulled over once a week sometimes. All the white guys never were. I mean, it was like patently clear. I just saw that in my own school and after that. The police had the power to pull over whoever they wanted, and they focused on the specific in a racist way. The church, as we're having this conversation around truth, I'm starting to liken, I don't remember which film or programme. You remember when in the 50s or whatever people were asked, who do you work for? I work for the company. You remember that kind of that sort of rhetoric? Yeah. These people represent the company. That isn't something very tangible, but they have the power like the police do. How do you shift that? Where what you talk about, I'm like, that's exactly why I'm a Christian. That I want to see the way, the truth and the life. I want to see the kingdom of heaven, part of the world that I'm in, and any part that God can use me, fantastic. That's what motivates me. What about the company? How can, why is there such...
Are you asking how do institutions change?
Can it?
Yeah.
I mean, we've just, the person that's just been appointed was in charge when someone killed themselves during COVID.
Alan Griffin, Yeah, she's not spotless, Sarah Mullally, sadly, and I think we needed an Archbishop of Canterbury who was absolutely impeccable in their in their record on safeguarding. We haven't got one. We've got someone who...
We have two people who one.
Cottrell as well.
Oh
yeah. Cottrell, well, he'll retire soon, presumably. And Sarah Mullally will only be there about 7 years. But yeah, no, it's that they are both unsuitable for their office because they have handled safeguarding poorly. And there are, not everyone has. And it's... and these sort of mealy-mouthed apologies and these reports that say, well, it wasn't handled as well as it should, but let's not mind too much. That's essentially what those reports say. And of course, they marked each other's homework, didn't they? Cottrell sort of vindicated Mullally at London. It's an absolute joke. And
everyone sees it as
absolutely. The church's credibility is enormously damaged. Because people in the outside world think, well, yeah, they're a joke. And of course they are a joke. And they can make all these, the only people who take them seriously are the people equally invested in the institution. Or people being sycophantic for whatever reason, occasionally from outside the church, who want something to gain from it. So the way we change, towards the end of that book, I say we need a clear out of bishops. And that is the ultimate answer. Any culture of an organisation, when it changes, they have a clear out.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen within the church because it's sort of reputationally subsidised, really. But yeah, we need just an absolute clear out.
What's it subsidised?
Well, everyone's got an investment in the Church of England being a little bit hopeless. I heard one person say, it's like a sort of maiden aunt, the Church of England. Most of the time you want to wring its neck, but it comes into its own at Christmas, and you've got a certain amount of affection for her, and that sort of thing.
But I don't think that's the new generation. I watched the coronation of the king, where Welby looked like a head boy being given a presentation. I get to do my thing.
I know.
And to me,
but there were others, wasn't there? There was Penny Mordaunt with the sword, enjoying every minute of it. So what happened?
But that was religion.
Yes. Well, Westminster Abbey is just visually awful, really, because it's just a religious building which has got superimposed over it, all stuff to do with national identity. And the coronation, the militarism involved in both the funeral of the Queen and the coronation was so sort of anachronistic, really. We're not that sort of country anymore. And yet, because these events, certainly in recent times have happened so infrequently, we end up with this massive throwback to a previous era. But yeah, we've just got, things that will help would be getting rid of bishops' stupid clothing. So bishops wearing mitres, for instance. No Church of England, as I say in the book, no Church of England bishop since the Reformation wore a mitre until 1885, Edward King. No archbishop till Cosmo Lang in 1929. And yet, to insecure people about their position, dressing up's really important because they've got no real confidence that they can give a credible message. So they have to wear silly clothing. They have to have people fawn over them. They have to, because there's no inner confidence. And we've got to clear out what we need is, and occasionally people have done it. Tim Dudley Smith, the Bishop of, I think, Thetford did it, where he didn't wear a mitre at any point. And we need people prepared to take those symbolic things where they say, I won't wear the nonsense clothing, not because I'm necessarily making a theological point, but more because I'm showing that the credibility of what I want the credibility to rest on what I do and what I say. I want to have an intrinsic authority, not an extrinsic authority.
The thing which I feel able to ask you, which is, I guess, fairly punchy, is, have we not gone too far? So I don't see myself as being Church of England now. However, I studied at Ridley, I worked in Church of England churches, I worked in a HTB plant. The familiarity of it is near, but I'm not a member or whatever. The Baptists would say member, whatever it is.
Well, you've been put off, haven't you?
Well, I think the bishops losing their hats isn't. I just wonder if.
Oh, I'm only saying that's an easy win. I'm not saying that's going to sort anything.
No.
What I'm saying is that...
But with two at the top, both sacrificing their calling for their careers. All I was ever taught when I was a teenager was the culture is established by the leader.
Yeah.
And this sense of teachers are judged more harshly, learn to serve rather than lead. You know, all of the rhetoric, all of those little sort of ditties. Now, the two people at the top of the Church of England are the reverse of that.
Fortunately, though, it doesn't work as though they're CEOs, though. I mean, every church is essentially, in many ways, independent.
But the business church that Welby created and established, essentially it was business church.
Sort of try to in a way, but I think, you know, the Church of England cannot be governed in that way. So essentially local churches have a lot of autonomy. Now there's dangers that go with that. But fortunately you can have absolute rubbish bishop and your church can still work really well.
Sure.
You know, it doesn't, you know, you can have people in authority over you. And I've had, for the majority of my time, absolutely hopeless bishops and archdeacons, as I've got a brilliant archdeacon now. And it doesn't really make any difference. They're largely irrelevant. It depends a little bit on what sort of church you're in, but certainly within this church, we can make things work really well, really effectively. All the good things that happen in this church is despite the diocese, not because of it. And fortunately, that's the sort of structure of the Church of England, that it's a loose federation, as it were.
Until that power is needed to serve. And at that point, it harms, it doesn't serve.
Once you challenge the status quo, you get a furious kickback. And then you're into a conflict situation. But in normal time, you can get on and do as effective a job as possible. You know, and the crucial role that churches have of bringing God's love to people's everyday lives. I mean, I'm as motivated now as I was when I first got ordained. I love being a vicar. I love every day of it. It's great. Day after day, I have fantastic opportunities to be part of trying to do meaningful stuff for people's lives. And I'm not going to allow the rubbish people at the top of the Church of England to get me down and stop me, you know, because my day job is being a vicar.
Yeah.
You know, my sort of part-time role is trying to get the institution to change. And I regard that with utter importance, but I never really get depressed because there's too many positive things. Someone once told me that in ministry, if the consolation's out of the way, the desolations, you're fine. And it does, in abundance. But also the consolations of having challenged the safeguarding stuff. That's great. I will always know that I did the right thing by these people who'd been terribly treated, and that's great. And I'll always have their gratitude, which is nice. It doesn't, you know, the words they've said is incredibly affirming. And, you know, I've kept some of the emails and letters I received, and it's wonderful. And, but we can get the institution sorted, and institutions can change. So after Stephen Lawrence, it's still got a long way to go. But you do get cultural change within organisations. Often it has to get quite bad before that happens. But what you need is people to take over who are absolutely clear on right and wrong, essentially. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need amongst our bishops. We need a lot more moral fibre.
What have I not asked that we should be talking about? Because I often think this we've not spoken about living in love and faith. We don't. I think that would be a whole other conversation.
Happy to talk about that perhaps in another conversation.
The abject failure and the reduction of people through that has just been discussed yesterday in synod.
It has.
We don't necessarily need to talk about it, but and we were talking about it before we started filming. There just seems to be this utter I mean, I think I said to you, the question I continually ask is, what would it take to get me to return to the church? And at the moment, even in our conversation now, one of my best friends from school is your safeguarding lead.
That's great.
If I was more local, it would be lovely to come, but I'm sort of still thinking, and your church, as when I speak with any vicar, I'm sort of thinking, I get it. But when we're talking about this, and it's the culture looked to harm you, thank God it didn't work or manage.
But they're the ones who were wrong. You see, what the Church of England officially stands for, I'm 100% for. What the culture is absolute rubbish. But what I'm wanting to do...
But how can you just see that distinction is, those two things aren't separatable. You can't separate them. I just don't know if you can.
Well, all of the...
what's a good example? I will not buy a Chinese... I love motorbikes. I will not buy a Chinese motorbike. I don't want to put my money into the Chinese government.
Yeah.
I've been to Ukraine 3 times. I really struggle not to be racist towards Russians. My another best mate from school is married to a Russian, and we fell out over this.
Right.
It was really difficult because she said, and he said to me, Sam, we see things differently in this house. So it wasn't me just being natural. They said your view on Ukraine is different to ours. As someone maybe similar to you, looking at things from a principled point of view, looking at people and trying to understand the powers and principalities, or at least from my little view, it's hard to separate both.
Yeah, it is. But I think what you do is you hold an organisation by what it claims it stands for. And the Church of England is officially there to share God's love, to bring the message of the good news of Jesus Christ to people's lives, and that's what I'm trying to do. And if there's plenty about the organisation that is undermining its stated aim, then, that's problematic, and I want to speak out against that with all my might. But they're the ones promoting that culture and endorsing their culture are the ones who've got it wrong. I'm arrogant enough to believe that I've got it right, and there are plenty of others as well. And the reason it's so vital is we must never do what the Essenes did, for instance, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, which is withdraw out and form some holy huddle somewhere else. We've got to be in there fighting. And what I hope will happen with you, Sam, is that after a while you'll think, actually the church badly needs me. I need to come back. We do. We need you. We need you with your enthusiasm and your humour and your determination and your heart for those who've been hurt. And when you're ready, you can roll up your sleeves and return to the fray, and we'll say, excellent, because that's what we need. We need people who, and I say this carefully because I haven't been personally hurt by mistreatment in form of abuse. I've been, it's of a completely different order when you're given a kicking for going to bat for people who've been abused. It's completely different. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Emotionally, it doesn't, it almost, the danger almost is a bit arrogant where you think, I've been, So that's the danger.
Yeah, you went into it swinging.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yes, if that term is understood in the correct way.
Your mind went there a bit more than I did.
But basically, absolutely. So I never want to be, because I think funny enough, some survivors can think, well, what is your game? What you want? Sometimes I can get a little bit of a, what's going on here?
I get that too.
Yeah, but the fact is that I believe we must have an absolute heart for the vulnerable. As I say, that's top of the tree. And whether it's children, this whole church is built around being child-friendly.
I'm glad we're finishing where we started.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely, this is just...
It's core. The reason Matthew's Gospel...
That's why Jesus...
Well, Matthew's Gospel has 5 great blocks of Jesus' teaching, and the climax of the 5th block of teaching is that story, or that vision of the sheep and the goats.
Yeah.
And I read that, there is, people interpret it slightly differently, but I believe Jesus is saying, how you treat the vulnerable is the absolute litmus test of whether your faith is genuine or not. And nothing else we do matters unless they are top of the tree. And when we care for those who are vulnerable adults, vulnerable children, when we make them absolute priority, everything else sort of falls into place, because we are showing the ultimate form of love that represents God's character revealed in Jesus. Because Jesus comes to be absolutely, to bring God's love to those who regard themselves as worthless, beyond the pale. And so when we do that, an authenticity comes into everything else we do. And it's wonderful evangelistically, because people say, wow, if the church is like that, then I want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Because they see an authenticity about it. That's why when I have people who come and help at our night shelter, people new to this church, you know, when we were doing a night shelter for people who are homeless, they'd come along at the end of the evening, they'd say, I absolutely loved doing that, you know, because we'd make sure everyone sat down and ate meals together. The idea is that the people who are homeless for one evening or, you know, feel absolutely valued and, you know, play table tennis, play giant Jenga, you know, have a really great time. And volunteers would say, I absolutely love that. And I said, oh, do you mind me explaining why? And they'd look a bit surprised. And I say, well, what's happening is that you've got a bit of that, you know, losing your life to gain it. And when we put ourselves out to show God's love to those who are vulnerable, we receive a huge amount back. You know, it's unbelievably energizing, because we're seeing this vision of new creation. We're seeing a glimpse of the way God's going to make it all end up when he puts everything back together in the way it always should be.
And we're putting to death that bit of us that wants to save ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's nothing more liberating. And so my story has been utterly, I regard it as an enormous privilege. I mean, I joked with one or two of my friends. I said, well, how many people in the mid-50s have their boss trying to get rid of them? How cool is that, you know? You know, but what I mean, that's a slightly jokey way of putting it, but I regard myself as utterly privileged that in a middle-class setting where everything could just be about lazy self-preservation, I've had the chance to put my money where my mouth is over something that really matters. So I can look back on my life and think, no, I really did the right thing then, and the fact I suffered for it is the proof of that. But that's actually a real privilege, because it's not as though I'm sitting vegetating away in some sort of safe job where nothing's under threat. You know, the biggest privilege we'll ever have is when we get the opportunity to go into bat for someone who's vulnerable, and we get the chance to be the person who makes a difference. And I believe that happens in all our lives at various points. And if we can take that, and particularly if we then suffer as a result, we can then look back and think, I did the right thing. And God, I think, will say, well done. You know, you did the right thing there. You know, that's great, which is lovely. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
There it is.
Buy the book.
Cover designed by Nathan Larkin.
Yep, and we'll put a link in the description.
Yeah.
Please like and subscribe. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Cheers.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Good.
Was that okay?
Yeah, really good, thanks.
I do a few rants at points.